The blizzard had raged for 3 full days, temperatures plunging to 40 below zero, winds whipping even the sturdiest planks that Frost Hollow Valley had ever known. Yet, amid the fury of Montana's 1,888 winter, 52-year-old widow Eliza Harrow sat calmly in her dugout cabin beneath the earth, tending a small fire no larger than one needed to warm a pot of soup. No biting cold, no wind howling through cracks, not a single patch of frost on the earthen ceiling. Less than half a mile away, on the surface where the wind cut like a blade, men twice her strength were burning table legs, wooden chairs, bed frames, anything that would burn, and still freezing to death in the cabins they had proudly called their winter fortresses. 3 of them had collapsed right beside their stoves, bodies frozen solid just steps from the glowing embers, while they fought desperately amid frosted breath and walls icing over from the inside out. Eliza survived quietly underground, where the temperature held steady around 50 degrees. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if these strange tales of survival on the wild frontier intrigue you, hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is even harder to believe. In 1887, the cold snap hit Cedar Valley a full month early. Temperatures plummeted within hours, high-pressure winds slicing straight through the chinked logs of the Harrow cabin. Jonas Harrow tried reinforcing every seam, stuffing in more rags, piling on more wood, but the heat in the room kept dropping. The fire burned hot but couldn't offset the warmth being sucked out by the wind. In just one night, his breath froze into thick frost. A thin layer of ice formed on the inner walls. By morning, he never woke up. Word reached the folks in Cedar Valley, and they immediately concluded, a woman alone, another winter, and she's done. No one mentioned the pressure winds. No one talked about single-layer log cabins. No one factored in how fast heat loss accelerates with wind speed. They just looked at the final outcome and slapped a label on it. Eliza didn't argue. She cleared out the cabin, gathered Jonas's belongings, and sat silently for days beside the dying fire. But in those quiet days, one memory came back clearly: childhood visits to her father's root cellar. There, even when it was always below 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, the ground held steady at 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. No wind, no heat loss, just earth, but more stable than any log wall. Eliza began recording temperatures inside and outside the old cabin. She saw the simple truth. Log cabins failed not from lack of firewood, but from too much surface area exposed, unable to resist wind-driven heat loss. She reviewed Jonas's tools: hammer, shovel, depth gauge, notes on wind speeds he had tested. Everything pointed one way. To survive winter, exposure to wind had to be minimized and the Earth's stable heat harnessed. Jonas's death didn't crush Eliza for long. It led her to a clear technical conclusion. Traditional cabins were no longer suited to the changing climate. And if she kept living in one, the winter of 1,888 would repeat the same ending. From there, the idea took shape: a half-buried shelter, walls shielded from wind, roof retaining heat, relying on the stability of deep earth rather than luck. Eliza decided to build it, alone, not to prove anyone wrong, but because she refused to be the next victim of Montana's cold winds. Eliza began re-examining everything she had once taken for granted. Jonas's cabin walls were barely 3 inches thick, pieced together from uneven planks, every seam a point where high-pressure wind could penetrate. She tested by pressing her hand against each spot on lighter wind days. Cold air still seeped through, even with the fire roaring inside. This explained why the cabin always lost heat faster than the stove could replace it. She checked the roof, measuring with her husband's remaining small thermometer. When it dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside, condensation gathered on the inner roof within minutes. Moisture turned to droplets, then froze. The thin roof conducted heat too quickly, failing to create the needed insulation layer. The cabin fire only warmed the air temporarily, never achieving stable heat. Meanwhile, when she dug a shallow test hole behind the cabin, the thermometer read 44 degrees Fahrenheit at just over 2 feet deep. On strong wind days, the temperature barely fluctuated. Earth clearly offered stability. Wood could not match. She kept recording. At -5 degrees Fahrenheit outside, the ground hovered around 45-48 degrees Fahrenheit. A nearly 50-degree difference revealed something Eliza had never considered. If shelter could be placed in that stable zone, fire needs would drop dramatically, and wind would lose its lethal role. Passing a hillside one day, she spotted a fox den. Snow covered the entrance, but warm air clearly escaped inside. At negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, that vapor rose visibly, a proof of heat retention. Nearby rabbit burrows worked the same. Animal structures followed one principle. Less wind exposure meant less heat loss. Eliza recalled indigenous groups that had passed through Cedar Valley. Some families built semi-subterranean huts with thick earthen roofs and low ground-level entrances. Even in heavy snow, they carried on normally. No complaints about wind, no excessive firewood. They relied on earth more than fire. Scattered observations suddenly formed a system. Log cabins failed from large wind-exposed surfaces, thin walls, conductive roofs. More wind equaled exponential heat loss. Earth, by contrast, maintained relatively stable year-round temperatures, sharply reducing convective losses. Eliza wrote in her notebook, "If wind is the primary cause of heat loss, living structures must be placed where wind cannot reach. Heat retention comes not from stronger fires, but from Earth's stability." And she concluded clearly. Surviving winter wasn't about fighting wind, but avoiding it, not retaining heat with fire, but with earth. Cedar Valley wasn't a place where minds changed easily, especially when the idea came from a widow. When Eliza drove her first shovel strokes into the hard ground at the base of the hill, 3 men considered the town's leading voices. Caleb Merritt, Orrin Pike, and Deputy Ford stopped to watch and burst out laughing as if witnessing some clumsy joke. Caleb said loudly enough for everyone in the nearby saloon to hear, "She's digging her own grave." Orrin slapped his friend's shoulder and added, "What does a widow know about wind and insulation? Wood walls couldn't hold it. How's her hole gonna do any better?" Deputy Ford, the quietest, just smirked and walked off. But his look was pure skepticism. Those words spread fast across the valley. And every day, as Eliza bent to dig a few more inches, at least one of the 3 would show up to repeat the same taunts, just varying the tone with their level of irritation or amusement. Soon, town children started echoing them in their own way, turning mockery into a game. They'd run past her worksite yelling, "Mole woman, dig deeper." Some even mimicked scratching the earth before cracking up. To them, it was harmless fun. To the adults, it signaled that Mrs. Harrow had failed from the start. A widow shouldn't attempt what even men didn't understand. But Eliza never responded. Each shovel stroke steady, neither rushed nor slow. Each afternoon, as the sky grayed, she stopped, pulled out her notebook, and recorded, "Today's depth, 32 inches. Soil temperature, 46 degrees Fahrenheit." Data was all she cared about, not Caleb's volume or Orrin's sneers. She knew what they thought of her, but she also knew it had nothing to do with the physics of wind and earth. Other neighbors passing by shared the same look, pity mixed with doubt. They said little, but a cautious nod told Eliza no one believed she was right. Men in the area were used to thinking winter survival meant fire, strength, thick log walls. They dismissed ideas relying on earth, and certainly didn't believe someone like Eliza could grasp principles they'd never noticed. By the 3rd week, when the pit was wide enough to reveal the clear shape of an emerging structure, the ridicule turned to more serious talk. In the saloon, Orrin declared, "If she tries wintering down there, snow will bury her, and she'll suffocate." Caleb replied, "Or the earthen walls will collapse. Nothing can stop that." Deputy Ford added firmly, "Wind's stronger this year. One wrong night, and it's over." They all nodded, confident in their verdict like a panel of experts. But none had ever measured wind speeds. None had tried putting a thermometer in the ground. None had tested Earth's natural insulation. None asked why animals survived winter far easier than human log cabins. Eliza kept digging. She didn't argue, explain, or try convincing anyone. Each evening after sunset, she added another line about depth, moisture, and temperature. That was all she trusted. Data. And the fact that no one believed, no one truly understood what she was doing, became the very conflict mirroring the original stories. One person quietly pursuing correct principles while the entire community unanimously rejected them. They believed Eliza Harrow was digging a mistake, She knew she was digging survival for the coming winter. Eliza began excavating in early June, when Cedar Valley soil was just soft enough for a shovel to bite without needing a pick. She measured with string and wooden stakes, marking a rectangle about 18 feet long and nearly 10 feet wide. Her goal was 5 feet deep enough to reach the year's stable heat layer. The work wasn't technically complex, but the sheer volume exceeded what any ordinary woman could manage. Each shovelful brought up only a few pounds, and to reach her target she had to remove and haul over 20 tons of earth across 6 weeks. She used Jonas's old 3-wheeled cart with its low bed, loading no more than 50 pounds per trip to avoid breaking the axle. Each day she estimated 300 to 400 small trips, enough for visible progress yet within her endurance limits. As she peeled away even layers, she kept the bottom smooth for later stone flooring. Once the pit passed 3 feet, she built a gentle ramp for cart access. She judged the slope by eye but always kept it safe to prevent soil sliding back in. At 4.5 feet, she began banking bermed earth on 3 sides, chest high. The berms were tamped tight with a hoe, forming natural wind barriers for the coming winter. She checked them each afternoon for settling and adjusted loose spots. At the pit bottom, Eliza laid flat stones gathered around the valley. She fitted them tightly, creating a solid, moisture-resistant floor. In the southwest corner, she raised the floor 1/2 inch for a slight slope, allowing meltwater drainage if snow ever seeped in. Stone flooring took nearly as long as digging because Eliza insisted on load-bearing strength and no water pooling, 2 critical factors for a semi-subterranean structure. Each evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridges, she stopped, leaned her shovel against the berm, pulled out her small notebook, and wrote, Day 19, moisture 38%, soil temp 46 degrees Fahrenheit at 4.8. Those numbers meant nothing special to outsiders, but to Eliza they confirmed she was on the right path. 6 weeks passed, the pit reached full size, berms stood firm, stone floor lay flat and dry, but her body paid the price. Blistered hands, aching arms, a persistent back throb whenever she bent. Some evenings she had to sit a long while before standing. Still, gazing at the depth, the berms she had built, the smooth stone surface like a real floor, her eyes remained bright, not from pride, but because she saw the structure beginning to take the shape of something she believed would carry her through the coming winter. The grueling work exhausted Eliza, but her resolve never wavered. The hardest part, removing enough earth from the pit, was done, and everything remaining was just assembly following the physics she had observed all year. In the quiet of the 6th week's final afternoon, Eliza stood at the pit's edge, sighed, yet her face carried a clear brightness. She had laid the foundation for a shelter that could help her survive a winter harsher than anyone in town imagined. Eliza began raising walls right after excavation finished. She chose dry stack stone, no mortar needed, because Cedar Valley rocks had natural flat faces and enough weight for stability when placed correctly. She rotated each stone 3 or 4 times to find the best fit, then shimmed gaps with smaller pieces. Once walls reached knee height, she mixed mud mortar from fine clay, sand, and water, using it only at load-bearing points like corners and berm junctions. The mix wasn't fully waterproof, but it bonded the structure, reducing winter wind infiltration. Stone walls rose to nearly 4 feet above the floor, combining with outer berms for double protection, a hard load-bearing layer and a soft heat-retaining one. Next, Eliza built the entrance, the part she considered decisive for heat retention. She designed it L-shaped, first section low and long, second higher leading into the main space. Purpose clear: keep cold air pooled low, prevent direct wind rush inside. She used leftover timber from Jonas's old cabin for framing, reinforcing edges with stone. She tested the turn height repeatedly by lighting candles in different positions to observe airflow. When flames stopped flickering in drafts, she knew it was right. The roof was the heaviest work. She hauled long pine beams, nearly 8 feet each, from the forest edge, laying them parallel about 12 inches apart for the main frame. Over the beams, she layered thick bark strips, overlapping multiple times to reduce moisture penetration. Then she boiled pine pitch until thick and brushed it across the entire surface for waterproofing. Once cooled, she shoveled earth atop it to nearly 12 inches thick. The soil weight further stabilized the roof and boosted insulation. Finally, she transplanted patches of buffalo grass from nearby meadows, placing them atop the soil and patting gently for roots to take. Thanks to the sod, the roof blended into the hillside from afar, minimizing direct wind contact and preventing rain erosion. Eliza bored 2 hollow wood vent pipes, one high near the roof, one low near the floor. This followed natural convection. Warm air rises and exits the high vent. Cooler air enters low but loses most chill passing through walls and berms. She tested airflow by hand several times. Steady movement confirmed the design worked. Inside, Eliza built simple wooden shelves for tools, dry goods, and stored food. A small stone stove sat in the east corner for easy smoke exit via the vent, avoiding buildup in the low space. She added a small wind trap door at the L-turn during major storms. Lowering it isolated the cabin almost completely from outside pressure. As the structure took clear shape, passers-by no longer just chuckled lightly. They lingered longer, eyeing the stone walls, earthen roof, low ground-level entrance. Orrin Pike shook his head, loud enough for the others. When the storm hits, that hole becomes a real grave. Caleb Merritt replied, "Earthen walls won't stand wind. She thinks it'll save her." Deputy Ford just stood back, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. But Eliza didn't stop. Each day she checked stone to roof joints, adjusted minor settling, and noted in her book, Day 43, moisture 40%, soil temp 47 degrees Fahrenheit. The structure still followed her principles. Minimize wind exposure, maximize thermal mass, use earth as primary insulation. By the final construction week, the cabin stood complete. Sod roof with grass cover, double-layer stone walls, L-shaped entrance, dual vents, and space enough for one person through a long winter. As Eliza stood viewing her work from the pit edge, sweat soaking her scarf, arms limp after hauling beams and tamping soil, she could still see one clear truth. The structure wasn't beautiful or grand, but it obeyed physics. It was right from the very first principle. All that remained now was the coming winter to confirm the results. That winter arrived late and weaker than most years, a good chance for Eliza to test the structure she had spent half a year perfecting. One night with light, 25 miles per hour winds, outside temperature dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. For many log cabins in Cedar Valley, that meant constant overnight stoking to maintain warmth. But Eliza chose not to light even a single ember in her underground cabin. She wanted to see how it performed without added heat. At dawn the next day, she opened her notebook, placed the thermometer on the table, and waited minutes for stabilization. The needle settled at 47 degrees Fahrenheit, a 27 degrees Fahrenheit difference from outside with no fire. She recorded immediately. First cold wind day, outside 20 degrees Fahrenheit, inside 47 degrees Fahrenheit. No fire lit. Those numbers meant little to outsiders, but to Eliza they confirmed the thick earth layer, 3-sided berms, and L entrance were sharply reducing heat loss while maintaining stability no log cabin could match. That noon, a Crowley boy ran past and paused at the low entrance. Mischievously he crawled in, sat a few seconds, then bolted out, eyes wide. "It's warm like fall," he yelled before racing to his mother. That sparked a few neighbors' curiosity, though none approached. By afternoon, word of Mrs. Harrow's warm hole spread along the town's main road. At the saloon, Caleb Merritt heard and smirked. "Wind only 25 miles per hour and she's bragging. Wait for a real storm to see what that hole holds." Orrin Pike added, "Earth won't hold at 60 miles per hour. Just wait, this winter will teach her." Deputy Ford just sipped his drink and said briefly, "One night proves nothing." Those words spread as fast as the cold outside, reinforcing the men's belief that Eliza's structure was just a reckless experiment. But for Eliza, that night's result was enough to continue. A cabin maintaining stable heat without relying on fire, that was the first sign she was on the right path. The 1887 winter had taken Jonas, because log cabins couldn't retain heat against strong winds. Now, stepping out the L entrance and seeing the buffalo grass roof still holding faint warmth beneath the season's first thin snow, Eliza knew every data point confirmed what she had believed from the start. Earth didn't betray winter like wood had. The men could dismiss it. Children could mock. But the numbers, temperature, humidity, wind speed, and Earth's stability stood with her. And for Eliza, Data was always more reliable than an entire town's words. Word from Bozeman arrived late one January afternoon. The mail carrier barely knocked on doors before turning his horse back, leaving one short sentence that silenced all of Cedar Valley. The worst storm since '66 is forming. Winds expected over 60 miles per hour. To those who'd lived long enough in the area, '66 was a marker no one wanted, recalled the year blizzards toppled dozens of cabins, killed livestock, and forced families to flee in despair. But this year, early season cold had already hit unusually low, and the northern cold fronts carried far greater ferocity. That very evening, winds began rising. Fine snow streaks skimmed the ground, not falling straight but whipped into long, drifting layers across the valley. The sky shifted to pale gray, the familiar sign of losing atmospheric stability. Traditional log cabins immediately barred doors tight. People reinforced entrances with extra planks, stuffed wool into cracks, hastily piled firewood on porches. Smoke smells and hammer bangs echoed from many directions. But beneath those sounds lay an unease everyone knew, yet no one voiced. If this storm matched reports, the thinly chinked log cabins would once again prove fatally weak. Eliza stayed calm. She didn't bar her door like others because her underground cabin's L entrance was designed to block direct wind. Instead, she first checked the roof. The buffalo grass held firm, roots woven tight into the 12-inch soil layer. She probed edges lightly with a stick to ensure no sliding or cracking. Satisfied the roof retained heat well, she moved to the vents. The low one needed to stay clear for intake. The high one opened for proper exhaust. She felt airflow at each weak but steady, confirming natural convection. Then she gathered firewood, but only what was necessary. The dugout maintained stable heat, so she didn't need heavy burning. Water stayed in wooden barrels away from walls to avoid freezing. Food sat high on shelves near the stone stove. She did everything at the steady pace of someone thoroughly prepared. Meanwhile, the town grew restless. In the saloon, talk of the coming storm mixed fear with old bravado. Caleb Merritt shot a glance at Orrin Pike and said loud enough for the whole place, "Let's see if Mrs. Harrow's hole holds up to the '88 wind." Orrin laughed heartily. "Earth and roof, what's that gonna hold? One strong night and it all collapses." A few others were genuinely worried but hid it behind laughter. Deputy Ford just shook his head, took a sip, and said quietly, "This year's different. Not sure any of us are ready enough." His words didn't silence them but weighed the saloon air heavier. Meanwhile, Eliza lit a small oil lamp, placed it center table for one final seal check. The flame stood steady, unflinching, the most important sign before a major storm. She noted, wind rising, roof stable, vent stable, soil heat stable. Outside, the wind's tone deepened, lengthened, signaling a powerful system moving into the valley. And though some now worried for real, the mockery toward Eliza kept flowing, as if they believed laughter could substitute for knowledge of wind, earth, and heat. But as the first gusts slammed the hillside, she knew the moment to validate her choice had arrived. The blizzard struck Cedar Valley at dawn on January 11. No final warning, no gentle transition before the wind shifted. In minutes, speeds topped 80 miles per hour, soon hitting 90 miles per hour. Wind chill plunged to negative 48 degrees Fahrenheit, cold that numbed skin in seconds of exposure. Snow didn't fall vertically but blasted sideways, scourging cabin walls like sharp sand. 1 minute outside risked freezing hands, face, lungs. People later said the storm didn't enter the valley, it swallowed it. Traditional log cabins instantly became fragile boxes. Log walls shuddered, chinking gaps widened with each gust, allowing knife-like cold blasts inside. Stove heat couldn't repel the wind. Instead, wind sucked warmth out faster than fire could replace it. At the Merritt cabin, Caleb burned wood until the stove glowed white-hot, yet the hanging thermometer barely reached 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The family bundled in wool, 3 layers, then 4, but breath still froze into ice crystals on scarves. When the first inner wall ice appeared, Caleb knew they couldn't last the night there. Farther north, the Rollins family fared worse. Their 6-year-old had coughed since afternoon. But at peak storm, each breath grew thin and painful, air too cold for young lungs. They burned all wood, then chairs, table, part of the bed, yet temperature never passed 12 degrees Fahrenheit. By midnight, the boy never woke again. That news didn't spread immediately, no one could venture out to tell, but it was the storm's first death. Not frozen outside, but inside the cabin they called shelter. By the storm's second day, snow buried many doors solid. Wind built chest-high drifts in hours, making opening doors potentially fatal. Cabins mere dozens of steps apart became completely isolated. Cold kept seeping from walls into bones, floor into feet, breath into lungs. By noon of the third day, Caleb Merritt had no choice. His walls showed large cracks, wind shrieking through like prolonged screams. His son shivered uncontrollably. His wife felt numbness in hands despite sitting beside fire. Caleb knew staying a few more hours meant joining the Rollins. Orrin Pike at the valley's east end reached the same conclusion. His older log cabin, worn chinking, couldn't withstand 90 miles per hour. He burned nearly all stored wood, yet heat refused to rise. His wife's back grew so cold she couldn't stand. Their 2 children cried softly, not from fear, but lung pain on every inhale. No one had strength left to argue or endure. All grasped the clear truth. Log cabins couldn't preserve life against this storm, and so, late on the third day, the Merritt and Pike families, plus one nearby household, 11 people total, chose to seek the only place offering any chance, Eliza Harrow's underground cabin, the woman they had mocked all summer. They couldn't walk, wind too fierce. They couldn't see beyond 3 feet. Snow blasted like blinding dust, erasing landmarks. They crawled, one by one, hands scraping ground to feel the slope. Without hugging earth, wind could topple them in seconds. Each strong gust forced the group flat, waiting tens of seconds for it to ease before crawling on. Caleb led, trying to recall the dugout's relative position: south downhill, low ground, look for the berm. But in the storm, all sounds and shapes vanished. They relied only on instinct and desperation. When Caleb's hand struck a high frozen mound, he didn't recognize it at first as Eliza's weeks-built berm. Only when his fingers found the low wooden L entrance frame did he yell unclear, whether from relief or exhaustion. They pounded the trap door, knocks weak as wind stole half the sound. Inside, Eliza heard uneven thuds, more like falling rocks than people. She took the oil lamp, went to the door, opened a small gap to peer out. Wind rushed in, nearly extinguishing the flame. But in the dim light she saw Caleb's arm, then Orrin's pale face behind. Without questions or hesitation, she pulled them in one by one, slamming the trap shut as each passed. Wind pressure shook the door hard, but the L design held. Inside, no one spoke at first. They collapsed, curled on the flat stone floor Eliza had laid last summer. Children shivered. Adults gasped, cold clinging to clothes like frost. Eliza fetched blankets, covered each child, offered water to adults. Once all were in, she wedged the door, lowered the thick wind baffle, then rechecked vents to ensure air, but no cold influx. The storm still howled overhead, but inside the dugout air barely stirred, temperature holding steady thanks to thick earth and 3-sided berms. When Eliza lit a second oil lamp, warm light spread across exhausted faces. No one mentioned the words they'd hurled at her all summer. No one recalled the digging her own grave taunts. They only knew that without this dugout, none would see morning. That night, while 90 miles per hour's winds tore the surface above, all remaining life in Cedar Valley lay underground in the shelter they had once ridiculed. In the first hours after the 11 squeezed into the dugout, no one spoke beyond labored breaths from exhaustion. Outside, wind kept shrieking in bursts, strong enough to make the earthen roof vibrate slightly with pressure waves. But inside, air remained stable, temperature tolerable. Eliza rechecked both vents, lit one more small oil lamp to ease the darkness. Everything functioned as expected, the first sign they could survive the night. But midway through the storm's third night, a serious problem emerged. The Merritt boy, who had shivered non-stop since being pulled in, suddenly coughed hard. The cough sounded dry and heavy, different from initial cold shock. Eliza recognized it instantly. Sign of thinning air, dropping oxygen. She turned to Orrin, whispering, "Feeling lightheaded?" Orrin nodded, his breathing slower. One Pike wife complained her chest felt tight and heavier than normal. Eliza moved to the low vent. No usual cool draft flowed from the edge. She touched the wall unusually cold. She tried lifting the cap. A thin ice layer coated the outside. The vents were blocked by external snow and ice. At winds over 80 miles per hour, ice could form and pack tight into the pipes, stopping fresh air intake. Inside air now only recirculated in the confined space. Oxygen dropped minute by minute. Adults slumped. Children coughed harder. One Pike child gasped so rapidly, shoulders heaved with every breath. Eliza checked the oil clock. Only 3 hours until faint dawn, but no one could wait that long. At this rate, the dugout would become an underground death trap. She had to act. She donned her thickest wool coat, wrapped a scarf over her face, then looked at the group. "I have to clear the vents. No other way." Caleb objected immediately. "No. Outside, negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. You won't last minutes." Eliza replied firmly, "If I don't go, none of us last hours." No one found words to argue. They knew she was right. She knelt at the L entrance, latched the inner baffle, then pushed the outer door. The instant the gap opened, a blast of cold rushed in, making inside lamps flicker wildly. She crawled out low to minimize wind exposure. Wind slammed her like a direct shove, pinning her to the snow. She inched forward, hands tracing the roof edge toward the high vent. Snow so deep each reach buried her arm to burning cold. Reaching the pipe, she found the mouth sealed by a rock-hard compressed ice block. Strong wind packed it deeper, forcing her to chip with a sharp stone, piece by tiny piece. Each strike numbed her hands instantly. Gusts rocked her, the first time she lost balance, tumbling into the berm. She tried rising, but wind knocked her down again. Ice edges sliced her knuckles, small blood streaks spreading quickly in the faint glow from the distant open door. She paused seconds to breathe, but negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit air seared her chest instantly. No time to think, she kept chipping. Only when she heard a faint crack like a shell breaking did she realize the block split. She shoved hard with both palms. The ice shattered and flew with the wind. Airflow from the vent surged, exhaling faint warmth from inside. The cabin could breathe again, but turning to crawl back, wind nearly flipped her. A third fall. She landed hard, hands digging snow, cheek against frozen ground. Fingers lost clear feeling. Yet the entrance was only feet away. She summoned remaining strength, dragged with one arm, inching like gravity wanted her gone. Finally touching the L edge, she used her last reserve to slip down, slamming the door behind. Inside air changed immediately warmer, heavy with many breaths, but far better than the deadly wind outside. All 11, young and old, stared at her. Silence for seconds. They just watched bleeding hands, rapid breath, and her calm amid a risk none of them would attempt. Nearly 10 minutes passed before oxygen stabilized. Children stopped coughing. Adults straightened gradually. The stone stove was lit lightly for warmth, without rapid air loss. No one forgot that a few more minutes' delay, and the dugout could have buried all 11. For the first time since entering, their eyes held no doubt or resentment. They looked at Eliza Harrow as the only person in Cedar Valley who truly understood wind, earth, and winter survival, the woman they had mocked mercilessly. No one said it, but the shift was clear. In those 36 life-or-death hours, they realized they lived thanks to a widow's decision they hadn't believed for a minute. And now, they knew better. When the blizzard finally broke, Cedar Valley lay under an unusual heavy silence. No shrieking wind, no snow-lashing roofs, just emptiness over the white expanse. And in that quiet, people began grasping the 1,888 storm's devastation. 17 traditional log cabins suffered severe damage. Cracked walls, roofs torn from beams. Some nearly collapsed. Surviving families rummaged broken timber for anything salvageable. 6 town residents didn't make it through the third night, mostly from cold penetrating too deep into lungs or cabins, failing to retain warmth. Yet, while the valley mourned, Eliza Harrow's underground cabin remained virtually untouched. Earthen roof intact, buffalo grass still rooted, stone walls dry, entrance uncollapsed. When Eliza opened the door for everyone to emerge, no one believed the place they'd spent 36 hours could stand after winds topping 90 miles per hour. Word spread fast. 3 days later, Madison County engineer Thomas Elridge rode personally to Cedar Valley. He'd heard of the sole semi-subterranean structure not only surviving the storm, but saving 11 lives. Eliza guided him down, pointing out every feature: dry stack stone walls, clay mortar, L entrance, dual vents, sod roof over a foot thick. Elridge noted details meticulously, nodding often, occasionally asking about wind speeds or inside temperatures during the storm days. After hours, he said a line locals later repeated endlessly: "This structure isn't just correct, it's overbuilt for need." By month's end, a Bozeman local paper ran a long article titled "Harrow Earth Shelter Born from Grief, Proven by Winter." It recounted Jonas's death, Eliza's solo removal of 20-30 tons of earth, the mockery she endured, and finally how that very dugout saved 11 when traditional cabins failed. When copies reached Cedar Valley, people passed them hand to hand, some silent long after reading, some sighing at realizing they'd been wrong all summer. Then something unusual happened. Instead of mere talk, they began learning. First came those who'd lost cabins. They approached Eliza, asking about earthen berms, tamping methods, sod roofs for heat retention. Then those with heavily damaged homes. They copied her L entrance diagram for wind blocking. Some even tried boring high-low vents for natural convection, though they'd once scoffed at her self-regulating air talk. Through spring, new earthen mounds sprouted on many valley hillsides. No one mocked them anymore. By the following summer, when grass-covered new sod roofs and semi-subterranean entrances appeared on many homes, Eliza often passed and paused minutes, observing the new structures. No one asked her to build. They asked her to teach, so they could do it themselves. And she always taught clearly, every detail, because she knew knowledge only mattered when used to save others. By fall, townsfolk erected a wooden sign before Eliza's dugout entrance. Plain, no flourish, just one short carved line: Eliza Harrow. She listened to the earth when no one listened to her. The sign stood in the low ground where wind once couldn't carry human warmth through winter. But now it symbolized one widow's quiet action, daring to trust Earth's simple principles when the whole community clung to outdated tradition. Finally, as another winter neared, a group gathered before Eliza's cabin to thank her. No flowery words, no rehashing regret. They simply said, "Because of you, we're still here." Eliza replied lightly, yet enough to become the philosophy Cedar Valley remembered for years. It's not strength that keeps people alive through winter. It's understanding how earth and wind work. Thank you for following today's story. If you enjoyed it and want more strange survival tales, please subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. See you tomorrow.